Hi, I'm Dylan Roberts. I'm the Chief Digital and Information Officer from York and Scarborough Trust, and I'm also the Deputy SRO for Digital across the Humber Coast and Vale ICS. This presentation is to provide an overview and inform people about our strategic approach to an electronic patient record program, how we hope it links into digital aspirant, and a potential ask around Project C. Project C is a project where NHSX are looking to work with systems, or in fact trusts, on how we progress work towards an open layered architecture, which is basically NHS policy in future, and we hope to combine the three requirements of our EPR program, digital aspirant and Project C, in a future strategy proposition from the Humber Coast and Vale ICS, with York and Scarborough Trust being the first trust to cab, let's say, off the rank in that ambition. This presentation is going to provide an overview of where we are with that at this particular stage, with a view of gaining some support and direction from colleagues in NHSXD to help us with this. So, by way of introduction, recent refreshes of both the ICS and the Trust digital strategy sets out some clear digital aspirations which are aligned to the future models of care and the future of a post-white paper not living with the pandemic type of system. This assumes that we will be working as a system across the ICS, not as individual providers as we were before, with a particular focus on system-wide outcomes over and above the traditional approach to providers delivering outputs, which requires a more adaptable approach to delivering technologies to underpin new models of care which may be different in different localities, and looks to enable significant collaboration across our providers, and in particular across the acutes, which include Harrogate, North Lincolnshire and Goole Trust, and also Hull University Teaching Hospitals Trust. However, there is an emphasis on unsupported and outdated infrastructure. This needs to be addressed first, so whichever strategy or digital approach we are taking is not built on sand. It needs to have those smart foundational infrastructure elements to underpin it. That's an important thing, an important Achilles heel that needs to be resolved before we can deliver on the aspirations we have for the future. The Trust, York and Scarborough Trust, and indeed Harrogate Trust, are part of the NHSX Digital Aspirant Programme. Our hope is to use the programme or other programmes combined to support investment in the future EPR and infrastructure it depends upon for both York and Scarborough Trust and the region. And as part of this process, the requirement was to produce a strategic outline case for the ICS. The SOC has been written as part of an ICS-wide approach with due consideration for the Yorkshire Number Care record and other EPRs across the region, and where they are in terms of their maturity and moves. Our approach was to engage ethical healthcare consulting, so using some of the seed funding to support the EPR SOC process. And it was really important to us that we had an impartial assessment of current EPR provision, in particular in York and Scarborough, and the options going forward. Streams of work that were considered are noted there on the deck. I'm not going to go through all of that. It's the standard stuff. And it was crucial that the Trust consider the technical dependencies, again including the infrastructure requirements and roadmap. The strategic context, well, as we've said before, it must support the Trust and ICS strategy, so those are intertwined, including our clinical strategy. So bear in mind, the Humber Coast and Vale system is one of the most joined up systems. York and Scarborough Trust are redeveloping their strategy and clinical strategy in the context of the ICS as a whole. Similarly, we are working across. There is a digital acute collaborative, which I currently chair. So we are looking and we are committing to a joined up and collaborative approach to technology to underpin a joined up and collaborative approach to delivering care or better health and wellbeing outcomes. Clearly, we need to think about the overarching strategic context in terms of the national strategic ambition, which is to separate the data layer from the application layer, and in particular think of the long term, if that's the long term, and we're trying to develop a case for an EPR approach for the ICS. We cannot do something which is counter to that, which would be to go down the traditional EPR route. We have to think about the long term and all trusts and providers potentially migrating or converging onto a common approach. And importantly, on an ICS level, this is also driven by the Yorkshire and Humber Digital Charter, which was agreed and adopted some 18 months. The success criteria, of course, hits the usual headings: potential affordability, the achievability in terms of organisations and achievability to be able to go through the transformational change. Very important to us is that a big part of this project is recognised to be people and process changes. It's 50% people, 25% process, 25% technology. Really important that that is done right if we're going to realise the benefits from our investments. It's important to be safe. It's important that we have value for money, and value for money not just for the trust but for the ICS, or the best use of resources across the ICS, and there's an acceptable level of risk and disruption. We also set some investment criteria. It's important that anything that is done is sustainable for 10 plus years. It cannot lead to decreases in functionality or usability from the current state. The current EPR CPD in York is functionally rich in many areas, and is not something we want to go back on. So in terms of the capabilities we've already got, we don't want to go back from the capabilities we've already got. We must either have an equal level of functionality or better from any replacement. It must clearly release time to care and improve patient care, and the combination of infrastructure and new EPR approach that we're going to talk about, it's going to do that in spades. Interoperability and the ability to support systemic workflows is very important. Those workflows across the system as well as across the trust, and it's important that our approach is about integrating with specialist systems via open standards. Importantly, on this point, we're very conscious of the fact that the approach across the ICS is a move towards hubs. So there is the diagnostics hubs. We're doing work with cancer as a system. We're looking at shared maternity systems, shared pathology systems, labs information system, of course, etc., etc. When those specialist systems are built and put into place, it's important that they are either procured or bought, but they must comply with open standards, so we can have a joined up connection to those. Our options appraisal overview is that all architecture options that do not separate the data layer from the application layer were excluded as per policy and direction, of course. And on this basis, what that means is continuing with the existing in-house EPR CPD for clinical functionality in the long term. Is excluded. However, as we said before, we can't go backwards, so we need to make sure there is a capability there that improves on CPD, and also an architectural model of separate data integration applications layers was selected as the only viable option. So, what do we mean by the open data layer? Well, we've had long debates and been around the circles and done a lot of analysis and research in terms of open air over fire. So with open air being designed specifically with persistent storage in mind, and with that more explicit standardization, we've opted and decided for our persistent open data layer and open data platform, which will be built and be available to both have data consumed from it or data provided to it from all systems across the ICS and all providers across the ICS. And we've decided that persistent data layer will be an open air data layer for clinical data only, which we appreciate is the current limitation of open air. And FHIR will be used as the transport mechanism, the integration messaging standard. As far as the application layer is concerned, what we've opted for and decided upon based on where the market is now is a mix of commercial systems and potentially ICS developed components. We have got a great ecosystem of development partners within our region, as well as software and system providers. Your TPPs and all that are in this particular region, and many others. Those development partners together can help you rapidly develop capabilities which can link into the shared capabilities that can interface directly with the open data platform. That is our assessment as to in terms of the best approach to start incrementally developing success within open layered architecture. The approach will be case by case assessment, as is happening now with new models of care around particular specialties. With case by case assessment will provide a best fit and value for money depending on that particular case, with the necessity for it to interface with the open data platform. We also expect commercial systems to be the best for the core EPR once they mature their EPR functionality. We've done some soft market testing. We've had discussions with Better. We've had discussions with Alcidion, for instance, and it's clear that their capabilities and their modern user interfaces and the like are developing quickly and are maturing day by day. The trust ICS and partners development teams are to focus on bespoke functionality and features. However, our expectation is that a lot of the team involved in this EPR development will be an ICS-based team, not a trust-based team. So considerations in terms of the path for implementation. We believe the realistic timescales based on this approach, based on delivering what government wants and what government policy and strategy is, the realistic timescales to procure and develop a comprehensive and rich open air database are expected to be 5 years, which takes us to 2026. So alongside what will be some extensive service redesign work, again aligned to NHSX policy and direction, we are committed to applying a user-led service design approach to the redesign of our clinical practice to simplify and standardize clinical practice and documentation, digitizing documentation, so that we will do that with CPD in the first instance by divesting of CPD from the specialties and developing a lean, mean core record machine, which simplifies and standardizes both documentation and workflow, with the view to do that across the ICS to again simplify and standardize those things across the patch, so that it's a consistent approach which is applied across different organizations. We also, which is important, are dedicated to develop a single presentation layer and user interface. That will be key to ensure a seamless user experience with a modern UI. Users cannot expect it to be jumped between several different systems, but that modern UI will interface with CPD as well as the open air backend, and it will be abstracted from the system. So our bid is about developing that modern user interface, and there's been work through the Yorkshire Humber Care Record, for instance, on such an approach already. As far as sustainability is concerned of CPD, the clinical patient database, which is the EPR in York and Scarborough, we do not believe it is sustainable in the long term. CPD has had a fantastic life. It was first developed in 1991 It's delivered significant benefit, and York and Scarborough Trust have been ahead of the curve for many years. But now, 1991 moved on to 2021. It's 30 years old. It's been built incrementally over many years, and a bit like a town built incrementally. As a result of that, ultimately we have to recognise the systems is on a monolithic architecture, which is contrary to the NHSX data strategy. It's a system that contains considerable levels of technical debt because of the way it has been developed. It's probably been developed with the latest innovations of the time, but ultimately it's a patchwork quilt. And whilst it's not a burning platform, that technical depth means in its current form, it's potentially not viable in terms of value for money for the long term in comparison to more modern systems. But CPD has at least a 5+ year supportive lifespan, which will enable a user-centered and technically and financially optimal transition. The transition here is important to be incremental and not big bang. So our recommended approach. The overarching approach is to shrink CPD into a core EPR, supporting the redesign of clinical practice and documentation, and importantly, trying to do that across the system. It is to divest it of its specialties. So CPD is all pervasive all around the trust, every part of the trust in different specialisms. So it's replacing these with specialist systems and applications which will need to be built on or integrate with the open data platform. This is the critical shift that's required in the market, which again, we need NHSX help on. The CPD front end will be redeveloped with a modern UI which can also interface with the open data platform. So in year one, we will have a synchronization between CPD and the open data platform, and we will be redeveloping in line with user-led design, user experience design, and service design around some of our processes, workflows, and clinical documentation. We will be redesigning a UI which can both interface with CPD and interface with the open data platform, which we believe is a great transition point. CPD will remain as the trust's PAS for the time being, recognizing that the open data platform contains clinical data alone, and that's a limitation of open platforms at the moment. And importantly, a new integration layer is required because the current system, the integration is built into CPD itself, and that causes limitations in terms of our ability to do lots of different integration work at the same time, which is the future. So there's a necessity to bring a trust integration engine in, or should I say a regional integration engine in, to support the new architecture and remove the current dependencies on CPD for integration. So continue to divest of CPD of specialist functionality, implement an open clinical data layer and integration layer, start to develop and populate it with data from CPD and other clinical systems via the integration layer. Importantly then, which we're starting to do right now, but continually with our other partners across the ICS, review the open air clinical systems market as an ICS collaborative and make choices how to provision the trust's EPR ecosystem. This is, we believe, an ecosystem approach. Different solutions might be required for different specialties. Different solutions might be required in different places, but all of the data needs to be consistent and combined in one place, and therefore accessible for research, AI, machine learning, and also accessible and open to an ecosystem of new providers and new entrants in the market. But it's likely that when we do a review of clinical systems, we will be looking for ultimately a replacement for CPD as our single core EPR system. The roadmap, as you can see, spans, and I'm not proposing to go through some of this, from 2021 right the way through to 2031. That is the time period, but there are critical gateways in terms of decision points. It's important that in this developing world, in this developing market, we have gateways in terms of making decisions, which we plan to put onto this plan, but you can see those there. The ultimate aim, of course, is that by the time we get to 26 to 2031, Hull University teaching and like Harrogate, etc., will all be interfacing with the open data platform. Oh, well before then. But importantly, we may be in a position by then where we can all migrate onto a consistent core EPR. Cost and value for money. Well, this incremental approach is based on agile user-led service design across the ICS providers. So we are getting benefit as we go. The strength of that approach is that it's adaptable to changing needs and changes in the system. The new ICSs are coming into being. The next 2 years or so will be shaping the strategy for those ICSs, what the priorities are for those ICSs, which will need to be delivered in a far more collaborative way. And therefore, we've got the opportunity to adapt and provide technology which is aligned to the changing needs of the system. It's estimated that the uplift cost over 10 years for this is about 20.8 million. That's over the 10-year period. And the cost is stated after optimism bias and before discounting. And this is versus an estimated flat cost of 30 million equivalent for a monolith, albeit that's for a smaller trust, but that's just for the one trust, whereas this is more of a shared approach. So basically, importantly, the cost and impact of the change is spread specialty by specialty, with the core EPR optimized until provider by provider we move to a new open platform and compliance system. So what is the total 10-year cost? Well, this is just spread out here. You can see that to do nothing, or the do minimum really, we have to do some work on CPD to the user interface anyway. So the do minimum approach provides a cost of 22.8 million. You can see the MPV in brackets. Our platform approach over 10 years in total, including the existing cost, is 43.6 million, which provides an uplift cost to about 20.8 million over 10 years with an NPV of 16.7. The costs include supplier contract costs for replacing CPD, also replacing specialist systems, the integration layer, and the open platform and EPR. So all of those, and those are all capabilities which would be potentially reused across the providers across the region. They are not just capabilities to be used by York. And what we've got in here, importantly, is that we want to bring in a clear change team. The change team is key to this. So a product team really, which will hopefully be based in the ICS in time when the ICS becomes to fruition, which basically is what we're calling a clinical fusion team, following the lead from leading trusts to apply service design principles successfully. A clinical fusion team which includes key clinicians in that, a team with AHPs, nurses, as well as clinicians. And clearly an enhancement to the ICT team in terms of doing the necessary developments that has to be done as a development of shared capabilities to be used across the ICS, which is in line with the Yorkshire Number Care record. Savings wise, there are some cash releasing savings and non-cashable savings as well. So the 3-year ask, and ultimately in the first 3 years to start the journey to the open platform and start to divest of CPD, would need 13.8 million. So I appreciate how much there's only a 6 million limit on aspirant, but basically that's the breakdown there for all to see. Analysis within York and Scarborough Trust in particular, and I appreciate this is as much about the infrastructure as it is about the EPR, has just demonstrated that through a combination of performance of infrastructure and all sorts of other aspects, that clinicians and users are currently only 65% productive when using technology in the trust. If we uplist the dependent infrastructure and introduce new service management approaches, we believe we can get to 95% productive. With the introduction of a new core EPR, a new UI, mobile working, and importantly and critically, modernised, clinical, simplified and standardised and consistent practice throughout our service redesign, this is the big bit, and digitisation of that big best practice will hit a minimum of 120%. 5% of productivity across our group equates to about equates to £5.1 million of productivity gain. So you can see there are significant non-cashable benefits there in terms of time to care, etc. There are dependencies. Key dependencies is the infrastructure investment. There is an investment case which will be parallel to this, and we will be presenting that too. That has granular detail in terms of what needs to be done. A full list has been a full assessment using some of the seed funding, which goes into the granular detail of exactly what requires to be delivered to bring the infrastructure to provide a minimum service standard to keep patients safe and not put the trust at risk of failure and clearly affecting patient lives and service. There is from a capacity and capability point of view, the idea is there will be an ICS EPR transformation team. That is the intent. So agreement around the skills needed in-house across the ICS and brought in through contracts and consultancy is important. We want to get that fusion team working. And also alignment to other trusts in the ICS. Strength of approach is important, that we have an ICS approach. Some constraints and risks. Well, clearly we expect the direction to be more flexible and less costly to change in scope and requirements. So in other words, because of the adaptations in the way that the system is being developed, there will be a requirement for a move, a pivot of direction, where we are able to do that with this particular approach, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all implementation of 1990s technology. There is an assumption that the open air data platform and EPR market will rapidly develop. We are very hopeful of this, having seen some of the capabilities of Alcidion and Better. Similarly, in terms of a constraint and risk, CPD is complex. Data migration will be challenging. I guess that would be the same whatever EPR journey you go on. And in particular, what we expect is a joint journey with NHSX and a journey of gateways where particular decision points are made, required based on an assessment and evaluation at the time. Decision points at particular iterations, which are gateways, which are important. So why our trust and why our ICS? Well, first of all, our trust, nearly all the data across most of the specialties is fully accessible and open access. There's no difficulties with multi-vendor discussions or commercial considerations. It's open, understood, and it's accessible. We currently have a highly skilled core team. We might not have sufficient capacity, but we have a highly skilled core team with good knowledge and experience of our systems and our processes. We already have experience of artificial intelligence and machine learning working in CPD, and we've done some work with universities such as Bradford University in terms of on various artificial intelligence capabilities which are proven to be beneficial to us. We have full interface interoperability skills, HL7, FHIR APIs. We've got full control over our systems and a willingness to drive to a future move. which I'm sure some of the incumbent vendors might not. And we have a fully engaged clinical team. Why our ICS? Well, there's a commitment to collaborate across all of Humber, Coast and Vale acute providers, to integrate with the open data platform and collectively assess and procure open EPR clinical systems. And there is a commitment across the whole systems with the Yorkshire Number Care record, a key connector across the place. The strategy is, of course, to move towards joint specialist systems. We can see that already with maternity, pathology, so on and so forth. And what's required is that one data platform to enable for standardization and data sharing. So next steps is the completion of the strategic outline case. To socialize that, we're going to board in July. We clearly need to work with Harrogate in terms of alignment of their SOC, and they've got a slightly different time frame, so we're keen to link in with that. And we want to have discussions with colleagues in NHS about the next step. You know, how do we develop the OBC around this? How can you help us? Yeah. How can you give us some answers in terms of the best way forward with the wealth of expertise that's in NHSX indeed to help us with this, to augment the expertise that we've got locally and the will we've got locally and the understanding of the system locally that we're going to be digitising. And want to get some consideration in terms of the timescales and investment for our OBC. Do we do an OBC to fit the usual boxes in terms of the limitations of the current aspirant programme, or do we do an OBC which is based on the more realistic, when we think about open layered architecture, that is more realistic time frame? So again, keen to have some of those discussions and get your advice and support.